Hey everybody, it's Amanda Call. I'm doing something a little different this week. While you watch this time lapse of me creating this illustration, I'm going to chat about something I read recently that inspired it and give you my thoughts. Let's see how this goes, shall we? So, I recently started rereading The Lord of the Rings. I read it several times as a preteen and teenager, but the last time that I had read it was about 20 years ago, just before the movies started coming out. I had vague recollections of some of the differences between the book and screen adaptation, but my memory of the book had gotten pretty fuzzy over the years. I don't get a ton of spare time to read, so it took me a while, but I just finished the first book. And by the first book, by the way, I mean the first of 6. Yes, The Lord of the Rings is actually one book, divided up into 6 smaller books, usually packaged and sold as 3 books, because we have to be confusing like that. Book 1 starts with telling you a bit about hobbits and the Shire and Bilbo's big 111th birthday party. It goes through Frodo's time as Master of Bag End, and then follows the adventures of he, Sam, Merry, and Pippin as they leave the Shire to eventually meet up with Strider in Bree. After the attack at Weathertop, the book ends with Frodo escaping the Ringwraiths by crossing the river into Elrond's domain, which magically swells to sweep his pursuers away. I remember every time I read this book previously that I found it all super dull and slow. Like, the hobbits are on these really level 1 D&D party kid gloves adventures where other people keep saving them. It all seemed really pointless to the greater story until they got to Bree and Strider gets them moving toward Rivendell. That's usually how I still hear people talk about it too, but rereading it now, I enjoyed it and appreciated it so much more. That slow build up to the bigger adventure really works for a couple of reasons. It gives us more time with the hobbits to discover their personalities and grow to like them before they're really put to the test. Oh, and by the way, Merry and Pippin in the books do actually have more than one shared brain cell, unlike in the movies. It also helps to avoid the kind of adventure whiplash that I see in a lot of epic fantasy stories. You know, where a character goes from their quiet, mundane life one minute to high adventure the next, and they either seem completely unrealistically unfazed by this, or they bitch about it and are reluctantly dragged along for half the story. Thanks, I hate it. I even like the stuff with Tom Bombadil and Goldberry. They serve as these sort of pagan deities, spirits of the earth that have no concern for whatever the sentient races of Middle-earth get up to, kind of like the bison spirit in Neil Gaiman's American Gods. But it's certainly not coincidental that their sacred dell is so close to the idyllic land of the Shire, which actually kind of brings me to the thing I appreciated about this book most of all. So, here's the thing. There's been a big resurgence in popularity of the Lord of the Rings stuff lately. Partially, this is because of the 20-year anniversary of the release of the first movie, but there's more to it than that. At some point in the early to mid-2020, I don't know, time isn't real anymore, I saw this series of images getting passed around social media that were just slide after slide of all these photos of the devastating, heart-rending things that were going on in the world. And on each image was overlaid a line of text from Frodo and Gandalf's famous exchange. You know the one, "I wish none of this had ever happened, so do all who see such times, but it's not for them to decide." It really struck a chord with me, as it did for a lot of other people. Finding yourself in circumstances that seem too big and too scary for you and having to decide how to meet them is, well, it's a mood lately. But the thing of it is, the danger was already there. The hobbits have seen men and elves and dwarves fleeing the growing danger of Mordor on the roads that cut right through their lands, but because they were not yet directly threatened, they could ignore it. They kept going about their comfy, privileged little lives of 6 meals a day and smoking pipeweed on the hillside because they still had that luxury. But the old forest, with trees that try to eat them as soon as they wander out into it, is right there, leaning on a wall on the edge of Buckland. The Barrow Downs are only a couple of days' walk from home. And most telling of all, the ring was in the Shire for almost a century. The slow awakening of the hobbits to the dangers of the world not far away from them, but in fact all around them and even in their midst, seems pretty applicable right now. In the last year, a lot of people have really started to face some ugly realities that they were previously lucky enough to be able to ignore, whether it was economic inequity, climate change, or social injustice. We hobbits are leaving the Shire and seeing what a big, scary world is out there. Now, that isn't to say that Tolkien, predicted anything currently happening, because that's kind of silly. It's more to say that there's a certain universal applicability to the story, whether you're talking about hobbits wandering out into the wider world, English country boys getting shipped off to the front lines of World War I, or white suburbanites realizing that maybe racism actually is a problem. I definitely didn't appreciate this dimension of the story when I read it as a self-absorbed 15-year-old, but these days I see it as some pretty great storytelling. Oh, and one last not really related thing. Some people have really latched onto a queer reading of the relationship between Sam and Frodo lately, and some other people think this is just the worst interpretation of the text ever. I personally think it's fine either way, but I will say that I find the idea of Sam having a crush on Frodo to be much more palatable than this archaic British class garbage where Sam is just so devoted to Frodo because he works for him and Frodo is his master. Merry, Pippin, and Frodo are all cousins who grew up together, so them adventuring together makes sense, but Sam is literally just the gardener. Are you seriously gonna walk into hell for some guy just because he's your boss? Hell no. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed some of my rant and the art. This is Frodo and Gildor having their late night fireside chat, in case you couldn't tell. Comment with your thoughts below. If you like this weird new format, let me know. Maybe I'll do another one when I eventually get around to the next book. So, anyway, thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time.